At the very least, I think it's important to move the discussion past the idea that people are being rude. That's unsatisfying. It's just giving the problem another name. Okay, so everybody seems to agree that lane discipline is a problem in the United States. But every time I go for a drive, which, to be honest, isn't very often here in New York, it seems like all the attention this issue is now getting hasn't placed us any closer to a real solution. I think we're talking and we're thinking about it in ways that could be more constructive and satisfying. So let's take a few moments to dig deeper. If we take a look at the coverage that lane discipline typically receives, we can see that it's treated as a manners issue, as politeness. People who block traffic in the left lane are seen as rude, like they're breaking a rule. And they are, absolutely. They're inhabiting a social space, like the one that I'm in right now, and ignoring the fact that they're in a crowd, insulated by boxes, but a crowd nonetheless. And people tend to act in predictable ways when they're in crowds. So because people are people, and people generally operate in predictable ways, I'm going to say that there's more going on here than just basic rudeness. Okay, theory number one, Plato's commuters. We are spending more time in our cars than ever before. Last year, a study that I've linked to in the description found a 7% decline in the number of jobs located within an easy commuting distance for residents of major cities. This happened because employment suburbanized. Commutes no longer follow a strict spoke-to-hub pattern, but they now flow from hub to spoke to spoke, and so on. And that's translated into greater distances being covered and more cars on the road, because the longer any given car is on the road, the total number of cars on the road is going to be higher. And what that all means is that rush hour starts earlier and finishes later. Okay, now think about the defining feature of rush hour traffic. It's that the rules don't apply. People inch along, and more often than not, they drone forward at one speed. That kind of disengaged driving, and not the kind of disengaged driving that you find in Manhattan, but a completely different type of disengaged driving, is now the norm. There's no room for etiquette, no need for rules to govern passing. So it could very well be that you're driving behind someone who's been marinating in heavy traffic for so long that they've only been exposed to the shadows of real road culture. Okay, number two, a shift in character. The US DOT tracks miles...
What are we doing? Is this Periscope?
The US DOT tracks miles traveled by vehicle type. If you total up highway miles with air miles, and then you look at the relative proportion that each of those modes comprises of the total transportation pie, you'll see that domestic air carriers now account for a greater portion of the total trip market than ever before. This becomes especially stark when you remove over-the-road trucking from those numbers, leaving only light vehicle trips. Look at that. From 97.4% of total miles traveled in 1960 down to 86.8% in 1990, and then down to an even 83% in 2013. What does this tell us? Well, namely that some significant number of Americans is substituting domestic air travel for trips that would have otherwise happened on the highway. Family road trips, intercity business travelers, a lot of those people are flying now. Okay, so if the first theory suggests that the drive right past left idea, the commonly agreed upon open road rule book, is less relevant to the daily lives of road users today and therefore familiar to and habitual for fewer people, the second theory compounds that problem by suggesting that there's been a significant slide in the proportion of long-distance trips people are choosing to take in cars. So the average driver, again, is that much less likely to have deep experience with mannered driving. Okay, so the first two theories would cast the average driver as an oblivious participant in a crowd system that they don't really understand, or maybe they don't care to understand. But what if these drivers actually think they're being helpful? Between 1985 and 2006, participants in the General Social Survey were asked whether they follow laws without exception, cherry-picking 2 years and 2 of the 5 possible responses, which also included things like no answer, for example. The 1985 group was split in the following way. 43.2% of those people said they always follow the law, while 56.8% said they always follow their conscience. So if we fast forward to 2006, we can see that the numbers have actually switched. Now we've got 53% saying that they always follow the law, while 47% follow their conscience. So, beyond all of the changes in the transportation mix and the commuting mix and the mix of road users with low levels of open road experience, we've also got a quantifiable social movement away from, I don't know, let's call it free thinking, and toward blind adherence to blanket rules. And what that means is that we can perhaps consider the second car in line, and not just the left lane camper, him or herself, as complicit in the problem. The leader may be oblivious or rude or a misguided dullard or whatever, but the follower, and by the way, that's you and it's also me, I'm definitely guilty of this, the follower is perhaps too content that his intention to pass permits one to reside in the left lane. So many of us are in fact confusing intention for action. Okay, I've got one more theory, but it's the shakiest of the bunch, so let's call it maybe a half theory. So this is number 3.5. If we accept that a road's design, in fact, has more influence on the speed of traffic than anything else, and by the way, I absolutely believe that speed and pretty much all behavior is design determined, then we can imagine that a 2-lane, 55-mile-per-hour road is going to see a greater speed differential between its driving and passing lanes than one signed at 65 or 70 miles an hour. Theoretically, the people in the passing lane will be a self-selected group who wish to abide by the road's natural speed affordance rather than the signed limit, while the people in the right lane will be the rigid rules followers. Okay, so if the limit is increased to a speed that's closer to the road's actual speed affordance, then the real-world differential between the two lanes is going to shrink. And the rules followers are going to feel more comfort and perhaps license to drive in the passing lane. So it might sound a little bit counterintuitive, but if we believe this theory, then one way to encourage a return to the drive right, pass left system might actually be to lower the speed limit, or maybe introduce some sort of standardized maximum minimum range. That wouldn't necessarily result in a different speed mix than we enjoy today, but spelling it all out might encourage a more distinct self-selected separation of the law abiders and the free thinkers. Okay, there are 4 theories that can operate together or separately to help explain this super annoying problem. At the very least, I think it's important to move the discussion past the idea that people are being rude or that they're just oblivious, because that's unsatisfying. It's not an answer for why. It's just giving the problem another name. So it's not like everybody has no exposure to manners, and it's not like everybody only drives on a rush hour march or avoids long car trips or follows the rules blindly. But when a significant minority stops driving right and passing left, an incremental but influential vanguard, the whole system fails. And what we have here is a cocktail that suggests, in a broad way, a road culture that differs appreciably compared to what you might have encountered 20 or 40 or even 60 years ago. A tipping point was reached and then passed.